If you've decided that your Dometic NDR1292 cooling coil requires replacement, we've got a little slideshow that'll help you walk through some of the processes. A few words of caution though. First off, remember you are working with both 12 volt, 110 and propane gas. Know what you're doing before you get too far into it. And as another little tip, take a little Ziploc bag and put most of the takeout screws and bolts into it and number them. It'll sure help. Locate the manufacturer's decal that's normally on the front of the refrigerator unit. Copy down the make and model just to be absolutely sure, and make contact with cooling unit warehouse. Okay, so let's start by removing the electrical connections. Remember that not all of these RV manufacturers follow the same wiring pattern as your house or your car, so you can have wires of any particular color in there serving both positive and negative. Best bet's to tape them off and mark them when you're doing so. Always use a backup wrench when you're removing the gas line, that way you don't twist any of the fittings. At this time you'll probably also have to remove one of the ground clamps that generally are on that gas propane line. Just a quick shot here to show you how you can get various different colored wires feeding in. In this case there was a white and a white with a black stripe on it, not anything like you'd find in your house. If you have an ice maker, you're going to want to remove the water line going into the unit and perhaps consider doing the out line from that little valve that's indicated here. Moving right along, you're going to want to remove the screws retaining the cabinet into the opening. They're sometimes buried. There may be two, there may be three, there may actually be none. Just a quick shot to show you how there may be screws buried in behind some of the other fittings that are there. Now we're going to move around to the front of the cabinet, and for the rest of these procedures you may actually want to take a couple of digital images just to show you where things came from. But you'll also notice that there is a small sensor located in the cooling fins at the back. There may be an arrow on the sidewall. Take note of where that arrow points on that sensor. Now start by removing the 6 screws retaining the cooling fins to the back of the cooling unit. After removing the screws, you'll probably find the cooling fins are retained by the cooling thermal mastic at the back. Remove those and mark lefts and rights so it makes it easier putting things back together again. Over on the freezer side, you'll now start removing the screws that hold the ice cube maker in. Remember, they come from many different locations and directions, so have a good look around to see what has to come out where, and it's a good idea, remember, to put the little screws in the Ziploc bag. Next, remove the freezer inner cover screws. With the ice cube maker out of the way, you'll now notice that there are a couple of extra heavy gray pipes moving through with more of that thermal mastic on it. Don't worry, those are all going to disappear once you've pulled the unit out. Here again, just a quick note, where you see that thermal mastic is where you're going to want to put it back on the new coil when it comes in. It's very important to make sure that that thermal mastic is there to transfer the heat and cooling. Okay, now you want to take that upper control panel off, and there are some more buried screws in there. The panel normally just comes off by just snapping right off. Take it easy in case there's just a hidden screw that you can't see. Now it's time to remove the hinges and the lower cover. This opens it all up so you'll be able to check around and see if there's any additional screws holding that unit in. 2 words of caution as you try and you take that cooling unit out. 1, it is very heavy. 2, you have to make sure you've got enough space on the floor to do it. Especially if you've got an island kitchen, you're going to want to look at moving that island kitchen unless you're absolutely sure you've got space to move and drop the unit down to the ground. Remember to pad the floor before you put the unit down. There still are sharp angles on it. You don't want to cut the flooring up. At the same time, you may want to take another digital picture of some of those bits and pieces that are all screwed on there. It'll make it a lot easier putting things back together again. A little tip here you may want to notice is that the factory installation quite often is not done very well. The insulation that is floating around on the sides all obstructs the airflow, and in this case there was actually no upper baffle that is supposed to be there when you closely read the Dometic information. So you may want to look at how you're going to improve the cooling as the unit goes back in. Now the fun starts in taking all that material off the back of the refrigerator unit itself. Keep a close eye open for a lot of buried screws because there are some there, and once again there's a lot of sharp points to be cautious of. Keep removing all the wiring harnesses that you find, and at the same time if you grab those 110 volt heaters you'll find they just pull straight up and out. It's not a hard job to do. Remove the gas line and the wiring that's associated with it. If you need to, make sure you mark the wires. Keep removing all the screws as you go around the perimeter of the cooling unit. When you see the bird's nest of wiring, you'll know why you've carefully marked all those wires, putting them back together again, and sure make it a lot easier. Now it's time to lift the cooling coil off the freezer and fridge unit itself. Sometimes you'll find it's got some additional tape and ducting material that's sealing it in there, so you're going to have to pull on it fairly hard, but keep it a good consistent pull. Don't try and tug, you bend some things, and you want to make sure you've got all those pieces disconnected. Just a couple of points before we start reassembly. You'll see where these arrows point. It's absolutely critical that the whole area around the cooling unit is resealed properly with the mastic and foam as directed in the instructions that come with the unit. Time to start the reassembly. Closely follow the instructions provided to make sure you get the thermal mastic and the foam in the correct locations. Make sure the cooling unit is well seated in the well that was in the foam, and then start proceeding to screw down all the various different brackets and other pieces in the back. Not all the screws are going to line up, so be prepared to drill some new holes. Here again, amongst all that maze of wires and all the other pieces, you may want to take a look at those pictures you've taken earlier on. It'll sure help put things back together again. In putting things back together again, you will note that they've relocated the cooling fan switch. You may want to check that switch out just to make sure it's operating. First off, it's nothing more than a bimetal one that's make and break. Make sure it works, because it's a good time to replace it if it doesn't work right now. Time to start reassembling all the gas plumbing that goes back into the back of the unit. Make sure that you've got it assembled properly and things line up. Do not force things. Check to see if you've got it right or wrong. Just another quick shot showing you some of the assembly and the pieces and where they go. Ensure you reseal all of the openings on the back of that unit. You don't want condensation getting in there. The water line that goes through to the ice maker may be too short. That being the case, see your local RV dealer and get order in or buy a new one. It comes with cutoff points on it, so that makes it much easier. Note how the drain nipple comes out the back. You want to make sure there you've sealed that entrance up as well. Once again, before you put the fridge back into the cabinet opening, you may want to make sure that everything is nicely tucked away, and that if you're going to make some improvements in there, putting a ductwork or whatever, time to consider it now. Just a quick shot to show you some of the sheet metal changes we made up the top to help duct that hot air away from the cabinet top. Time to put the whole unit back in there. Make sure you've got two people, because it sure is a heavy unit. You don't want to damage anything when you put it in there. Time for the final hookups on the propane, 12 volt and the 110 circuits. Make sure you check the gas line fittings with soap when you're going through this reconnection. One final shot just showing you everything being reinstalled. It's still a bit of a mess with spaghetti wire running all over, but that's just about the way they build them. Congratulations, you should have the complete unit installed now, hopefully with no extra screws and pieces left over. Give it an hour and a half and the freezer unit should start to cool down sufficiently. Word of caution, at the back of this unit when it's running, it will be hot. You can burn yourself, so be careful.